Please welcome Mark Morano.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. My book, he mentioned, was Green Fraud, Why the Green New Deal is Worse Than You Think. And my new book is The Great Reset, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm not going to talk to you about hurricanes and polar bears and carbon dioxide and Al Gore today. I'm going to talk about how they're using that agenda and merging it with a public health agenda in COVID and how they're imposing that upon the world. And that is the Great Reset, World Health, World Economic Forum, and the United Nations. This is a little bit about me. I was the producer of Climate Hustle. The picture on the top left is the actual streets of Paris, the day of our Climate Hustle premiere at the UN Climate Summit in Paris at an old movie theater. They put out wanted posters of me, and then they shut down our movie premiere, the protesters. And they had to have the police come in, and we had to do like a 90-minute delay until they cleared out all the protesters. So it happens in the climate world too. At Georgetown University, same thing happened. I had about 40 protesters come in when I was speaking there. Campus police did nothing. And then, of course, they offer you an escort to the car. And then the people came in chanted and don't let you speak. This is just some of the stuff I got to debate. Bill Nye on CNN, which was a lot of fun. And that's from this week, Smoking the Cigar with Jesse Waters on Fox News Primetime in the lower right. I was talking about Trudeau's smoke from Canada. They canceled my son's soccer practice. I live in Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. And we are dealing with the effects of their bad forest management and a meteorological phenomenon that's blowing down the wildfires into the Northeast. But I was saying he has a basic admiration for China's dictatorship, Justin Trudeau. So, of course, he would have horrible air quality that he's exporting just like China is around the world. And that's some of our other stuff. A picture up there, that's from Egypt at the UN Climate Summit. We went and did a protest inspired by the climate activist protest damaging arts. We went to an Egyptian museum and we protested net zero policies. And we said no net zero, and security came over. So we had some fun with that. We didn't actually get arrested. Those are the two books. I think there's a couple copies left out on the front if anyone wants any copies. That deals with the Green New Deal. The other book is a great compendium, The Politically Incorrect, goes through all the science of climate change. I spoke at BeTruthful.org, I guess it was January 2022, is that right? And it was very cold, but I gave a whole hour-long presentation on the science of climate back then. But here we are today. This is 2023, but this is where the seeds of energy, and I'll talk a little bit about energy and then we'll get into this. Rutgers University professor, this is from 2018 and 19, to save climate, we have to give up demand for constant electricity. So that's an important place for me to start because we know what their goal is in academia. Well, that goal then becomes public policy. This is in the UK. Era of constant electricity is ending. Families would not have to get used to only using power when it's available. And there you see Swiss president warns, prepare for electricity shortages. They're trying to get people softened up for electrical shortages. Obama, U.S. Treasury Secretary, this is last year, said this, the quiet part out loud, we don't want lower prices for fossil fuels, we prefer higher prices to achieve climate goals. So when you say, oh, the prices are really going up, that's intended. That's not an unintended consequence. This is my book, The Great Reset, and this ties everything together. I like to say my whole world changed in March of 2022. I was on the climate beat. First of all, I worked for Rush Limbaugh's television show as his TV reporter back in 92 to 96. And thanks. And I got to cover the climate marches, and I got to cover the animal rights marches and all the wacky, I went to the Million Man March, I went to all the different protest march for Rush Limbaugh's TV show. And then from there, I went to work at American Investigator Television, which was like a conservative 60 Minutes show, and did a lot of stories on wetlands, on endangered species, on organic food and farming, and a lot of the sustainability issues. I was talking about the UN agenda. Well, then I went and worked for Senator James Inhofe of the United States Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and Senator Inhofe was a treat to work for. He was from Oklahoma, but the committee, he was in charge of the whole climate energy committee. We fought Obama's cap and trade. Well, all of that that whole world came crashing to an end in March of 2020 because they no longer needed legislation to achieve climate ends on the federal level. Everything became about bypassing democracy. Every cabinet agency is a climate agency, and executive orders, and the corporate government collusion, ESG, which I'll get to. So what happened in March of 2020 was the lockdowns, COVID lockdowns. We did the 10 days to flatten the curve, 2 weeks to stop the spread. The World Economic Forum in Davos, President Klaus Schwab, in June of 2020, got very excited and said, this is a rare, narrow window of opportunity to perform a great reset on the world. Well, we were locked down, and they wanted to build back better. And this is actually a videos that they released. This actually was pre-COVID. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. This is the World Economic Forum. And remember, we were listening to Charles Payne talk earlier about private property rights and people not being able to afford to buy, and equity asset firms buying up land. Whatever you want, you'll rent, and it'll be delivered by drone. And the World Economic Forum actually spells this out. If you want to get a blender, you don't even need to own an appliance. You just order it up on an app, and a drone will come deliver it. They don't want you leaving your house, is the bottom line, and your rental house, I might add. The U.S. won't be the world's leading superpower. Well, by golly, Joe Biden has embraced this agenda, with the Build Back Better, and that's well underway. There'll be a global price on carbon that will help make fossil fuels history. At Climate Depot this week, my website, there's a whole analysis of 140 actions Joe Biden has taken to make energy more scarce and more expensive in the United States. So he's completely with this agenda. Meat will be an occasional treat, not a staple. This is another issue that's happening, and I'm going to get into that later with agriculture. And the World Economic Forum, they just had their meeting in Davos. I think it was Turning Point USA had some undercover people. They said they had meat at every single reception. So the World Economic Forum is not following their own edicts. Al Gore has said the time for a great reset. This is June 2020 on NBC Today. It's time for a reset to fix challenges, among them the climate crisis. So remember, this is the height. COVID lockdowns are going full strong. Churches closed, schools closed. Kids are being masked, and all they're thinking of is, this is going so well, we need to add climate to this agenda. That's literally what they're thinking. John Kerry, the World Economic Forum is going to play a front and center role, and the Great Reset is going to deal with climate change and inequity, all of which is being laid bare by COVID-19. Again, they didn't look at COVID-19 as a tragedy. This was an opportunity, the whole climate activists. And of course, Klaus Schwab, we penetrate the cabinets, says he's like a James Bond villain. And Klaus Schwab is the chairman of the Economic Forum, started this group, World Economic Forum, 1971. It's a place where presidents, prime ministers, billionaires, and Hollywood elite and royal family can all go off the books with corporate CEOs and corporate executives and cabinet members and have meetings with people who otherwise wouldn't want to be seen in public together, and they collude. This is where you get the BlackRocks and the ESGs and how we need, BlackRock chairman Larry Fink once said, we need coercion to get our agenda. Well, this is where they plot the coercion, and they actually penetrate the cabinets. He brags that half the cabinets in the world he thinks he has penetrated. So, what I'm going to talk about today, the Great Reset, is the intentional collapse of our energy, food, transportation, free speech, property ownership, and the financial system. And we're seeing that in modern monetary theory, the printing of money, debt, deficits, inflation, supply chain. The Great Reset is here. Cheap energy, you'll eat fake meat and bugs, you'll go nowhere and be happy, you'll say nothing and be happy, and you'll own nothing and be happy. So what's the history of this? Riley was talking about Marxism. Well, if you go back to 1919, the Bolshevik Revolution, this is, by the way, everything I'm going to tell you today is mainstream sources. I'm not going to be, this is a secret document. This is the Christian Science Monitor reporting that Vladimir Lenin's phrase against Tsarist Russia was to make the culture and the government and the country as bad as possible. Worse is better, the worse the better. Because then you can destabilize, collapse the country, and you can achieve your revolution. And that's basically what we're living through, whether it's transgender ideology and whether it's critical race theory or climate or the COVID theater we had to go through. So who's behind this? Warren Buffett, Bill Gates fund this domestic chaos. Who would have thought Warren Buffett, who even thinks of Warren Buffett like that? Warren Buffett has bragged that he's giving money to Bill Gates. In fact, he gives the lion's share of the money. Gates bankrolls, the Gates Foundation bankrolls critical race theory around the country, including math is inherently racist. They offer a gender identity toolbox, which asserts that gender is the result of socially, culturally constructed ideas. Now, if you go back, chaos. That's what Vladimir Lenin taught the revolutionaries in the last 100 years, is make chaos in your society. What can cause more chaos than race and gender relations problems? And look where it's coming from. The wealthiest, most influential people in the country. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. This is Bill Gates. Warren Buffett has donated tens of billions of dollars. As Gates himself explained, the company bears our name, the Gates Foundation, but basically half the resources come from Warren Buffett. You don't think of Warren Buffett as a political activist, really. He's not out there endorsing, he doesn't get involved in issues, but this is where he is involved. Now, I was talking about the collapse of energy, transportation, free speech. Is this a new idea? This is 1932. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, socialist kitchen cabinet economist, Stuart Chase, he envisioned an early version of the Green New Deal / Great Reset. Government control, these are his words, government control of banking, credit card, government control of energy, hydroelectric power, government control of transportation, railway, highway, airway, waterway, control of agriculture, state control of communications and propaganda. This is back in the 1942 was the second book. His first book was 1932. He actually asked in his 1932 book, why should the Soviets have all the fun remaking the world? Now remember, this was when Walter Duranty was going over with the New York Times, winning Pulitzer Prizes, talking about Stalin's agricultural land reforms, and how the Soviet Union was the vision of the future and communism. But this idea was always in American academia, American media, and American government. So what COVID did in March of 2020, it accelerated all these trends. World Economic Forum, and the biggest trend, and if you update what he said, 1932, why should the Soviets have all the fun? 2023, why should China have all the fun remaking the world? World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, declares on Chinese state TV, China is a model for many nations. One party, authoritarian rule, no democracy, is a model. So we know that, right? So what does the World Health Organization do when COVID hits? This is from February 26, 2020. Again, mainstream media. This is European media. Copy China's response to COVID-19. World Health Organization expert urges the rest of the world. Remember, why should the Soviets have all the fun in the 1930s with Stalin? And today, why should China have all the fun? Let's copy what China's doing. And what were they doing? Unprecedented lockdowns of healthy people for the first time in a public health response. Neil Ferguson, the virus model, if China had not done it, meaning the draconian lockdown, the year would have been very different. They were cheering China on. Anthony Fauci at one point said, can you imagine New York and San Francisco shutting down like China? Yeah, not only did we imagine it, we saw it happen. So what the key aspect of this Great Reset is the once free West has lusted after China's one-party rule. And this includes all the organs. This is on the pages of the New York Times decades ago, 2009. Tom Friedman, one-party autocracy has its drawbacks, but it's led by a reasonably enlightened group of people in China. The one party can just impose the politically difficult but critically important policies needed to move a society forward. In the case of someone like Riley Gaines and transgender ideology, they're saying, you don't get a say. We're going to impose this because it's critically important and we're in charge. We don't want anyone else dissenting. This is what they're saying, the quiet part out loud. UN climate chief Cristina Figueres, who I've interviewed at UN climate summits. I go to every UN climate summit in the last 22 years since Johannesburg, South Africa. They are unbelievable to go to because you can see what the UN is really up to. She called US democracy detrimental to the war on global warming, and she lauded China's one-party rule for doing it right on climate. Apple CEO Tim Cook, China aligns completely with Apple's value on climate. He defended China as very fixated on doing the right things. I mean, so when you think of China, it should give you warm fuzzies. Justin Trudeau, he has admiration for China's basic dictatorship. And I love that picture down there of the mask of Trudeau coming off and it's Klaus Schwab. That's him penetrating the cabinets. But he actually said this in 2013. He said it on video. You can watch the video. It's incredible. They say it. They're open about it. Energy Secretary Granholm, Biden's energy secretary. Look at all the dates. This is all, I've updated this as much as possible. Some of the articles from 2 weeks ago. March 10th, 2023. Claims UN can learn from what China is doing on climate change. As Charles Payne said, they're building 1 coal plant a week. That sounds like we have a good, I say let's copy what China's doing. But what she means is we need to follow China's rhetoric and follow the idea that we're going solar and wind. Yeah, they're going solar and wind. They're selling, we buy about 80 to 90% of our solar panels from China. They're made with the lowest environmental standards, the worst human rights records, child exploitation, exploiting Africa. But anyway, to them, China is just, we can learn so much. And that ultimately is what happened. The once free West in March of 2020, COVID lockdowns mimicked one-party China rule. Think of it this way. Every decision that was consequential in your life, and this is the first time in peacetime Western world, churches closed without a vote, schools closed without a vote, businesses closed without a vote, stay-at-home orders issued without a vote, weddings, funerals canceled without a vote, backyard barbecues canceled without a vote. Your neighbor could rat you out for money in the case of Los Angeles, and snitches get rewards was actually the slogan. If you see your neighbor having too many people over, you could call. And guess what would happen? They were threatening and cut off people's utility, water and electricity if you were caught violating COVID mandates. All of this happened without any vote. It was all done under emergency decree. And sadly, that's the emergency decree that Donald Trump had signed when he was duped by Fauci and Deborah Birx back in March of 2020. So during COVID, there was a clash between two schools of thought, authoritarian public health versus science. Science lost. That's John Ioannidis, how do you say that? Scott Alice, I always mess up that name, but expressing his opposition. So science lost this battle. And instead, we got a permanent state affair. This is German economic professor. The lockdown brought a foretaste of what is to come, a permanent state of fear, strict behavioral control, massive loss of jobs, growing dependence on the state. And in my book, The Great Reset, I talk about how they're crushing the middle class and they're offering universal basic income as the way to help people. So the more government takes and destroys the economy, creates inflation, don't worry, we're going to give you a guaranteed annual income. So is today's science more advanced? This is from the Washington Post. True story. He took a maskless photo with Magic Johnson during the strict Los Angeles, is the mayor of Los Angeles, COVID restrictions, but it was okay because he was holding his breath. Same reason when Al Gore says, hey, you fly private jets, oh, I buy carbon offsets, so it's okay. And John Kerry says the same thing. But it was actually, I still can't believe that. That's what passes for science. And this is Washington State, the top left. Those are kids actually practicing their instruments in the green bubble. That article on the left is very sad. That's the LA County newspaper. Children apologize to their dying elders for spreading COVID-19 as LA, that was during the height of the COVID, 2020. Would you ever want children or grandchildren coming to apologize to you if you got a cold or a flu and they think they're responsible? This is what they did. They weaponized human relationships. And of course, I love this one in the middle. See the teachers, no mask. Because remember, they thought, well, we're vaccinated. We don't have to wear masks. Kids all masked up. That's what the science told them. And you have to follow the science. Mask the children. The adults can do whatever they want. And, of course, if masks work, why 6 feet? If 6 feet works, why mask? If they both work, why lockdowns? If lockdowns work, why vaccines? If vaccines, anyway, it just goes on and on. The science was always evolving. Every study now looking at lockdowns, any potential aid that they did killed many more people. Not only killed, but deferred cancer treatments, psychiatric, drug, cultural impacts, deferred learning, mask mandates on kids have got major development issues with kids and speech. This is what the world has done. And even now, they're admitting it slowly. This is from this year, New York Times. Mask mandates did nothing. The New York Times is now telling us, unfortunately, it was about 2.5 years too late. But they're now saying it. So at least this was probably the most, that's optimistic that they're doing that. So what the Great Reset is ultimately about, and again, I think it was Charles Payne talking about, it's essentially crushing the middle class, making the wealthy wealthier. Workers lost 3.7 trillion during lockdowns. World billionaires gained 3.9 trillion. And they probably printed that extra 0.2 trillion because how else would they have made that? How'd they get that extra money? It's probably just extra printed money. But you can see that the largest transfer of money from poor and middle class to the wealthy was during the lockdowns as small businesses crushed and all the retail chains and big corporations benefited. Pandemic created, this should say the lockdown, created a new billionaire every 30 hours as millions braced for extreme poverty. California Governor Gavin Newsom bragged about how great the lockdowns were in creating billionaires. He said all the new billionaires, he bragged about all the new billionaires in California, and his state's richest people are doing pretty well. There was never a better time to be a billionaire. This is how they look at it. So in his mind, his policy, lockdowns are fantastic because the billionaires sprang up. And guess what? A lot of those billionaires are probably his campaign donors. Fauci's net worth. How could you not like Fauci? Look at this. This guy, if he has a portfolio, an investment portfolio, you better follow it. His wealth soared 12.6 million since March of 2020. That's quite, and that, again, he owns patents on the drugs that he gets to decide which ones get funded, which ones get green lighted, and of course he gets royalties from that, and it's the most corrupt system. Former FDA directors then go from the FDA to Pfizer, and it's a revolving door of captured agencies. So in Australia, they had it worse than we did. New Zealand was pretty bad, and Canada was horrible. China was the worst. But just to give you an idea, and there's a reason I'm pointing this out. Australia had quarantine camps for people, track and trace apps. If you didn't self-quarantine at home voluntarily, you were forcibly put into quarantine camp. The government was authorizing police to break in any land, building, or structure, prohibit movement of people, put people in quarantine, compel people to give information. There were videos of people who did Facebook posts questioning lockdowns and to be visited by police. A dystopian, tyrannical world. Who could possibly like what Australia did? Anyone want to guess? Ba-doop bang, there you go. Bill Gates, if every country does what Australia did, the world could prevent the next pandemic. Why do we care what Bill Gates is? But he doesn't look at Australia and say, oh my God, never again. He looks at it and says, how do we export that? That's fantastic. But then that's a real question. Why do we care? Am I just, Bill Gates this, Bill Gates that? Wait a minute. That's why. Bill Gates is at the center of our public health authoritarianism that we saw spring into action, and he's at the center of our climate authoritarianism, which I'll get to. But his organization, if you look at it, he is the #2 single giver next to the United States government to the World Health Organization. And he also is in charge of the Gavi Alliance. If you add the two together, it's very close. Bill Gates is the #1 funder of the World Health Organization. So when Bill Gates says we should be following what China did with their dystopian quarantine camps and military removing people from outdoor beaches, and then he should listen when he's in charge of the World Health Organization. During this pandemic, they also created new words. Anti-vaxxer, this is the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It was changed, the definition. It's not a person who's opposed to vaccines. Look at this definition. A person who opposes the use of vaccines or regulations mandating vaccination. So if you oppose, if you've had every vaccine in your life and got every COVID shot and booster, but you didn't support a mandate, you were an anti-vaxxer, according to the dictionary. And who are you to challenge a dictionary definition? Biden takes big step toward government-backed digital currency, central bank digital currency. This has come on strong now since March of 2020. Joe Biden issued an executive order for the United States to start organizing and looking into this. It is not just a cashless society, it's government in charge of every transaction and monitoring your transaction. And you literally face the day where if you have hate speech, if you misgender someone, your credit card may not work at the grocery store the next day until you correct your misgendering on whatever social media post. Simple explanation for central bank digital currency, which is coming from the Great Reset and coming from the Biden administration and Europe. If you look at this, digital cash can be programmed to ensure it is spent only on essentials or goods which the government deems to be sensible. So if you want to buy guns, ammunition, meat, gas, all those are not sensible in a climate emergency and gun violence emergency, whatever they want to say. They can prevent you from buying it with simple government control. We saw this play out in real time. Trudeau in Canada he actually did freeze the truckers' bank accounts, destroyed their jobs, had their insurance canceled. He colluded, he declared them terrorists, used the Canadian Emergency Act for the first time in the country's history, colluded with insurance companies and the banks to prevent the truckers from accessing their own money. He didn't cut off government services. He cut off access to their own bank accounts. In Slovenia, you had to have a COVID certificate to get a gas. And look at the top right there. Half of Democrats say fines, prison time is appropriate for questioning vaccines. And that's a local Channel 7 corporate news outlet. Again, this is not the Alex Jones news outlet. All of this is all major stuff. And should the Colorado Newsline, should the unvaccinated be denied health care? We had many pundits on MSNBC, CNN say that people with unvaccinated shouldn't even go to a hospital. They should be denied treatment. CO2 monitoring card. During this whole COVID lockdown, since then, UN and MasterCard teamed up. This is part of CBDC in a way, but it's more of a corporate international body collusion. They monitor and cut your spending off when you hit your carbon max. So this is voluntary at the moment. It's a special card that MasterCard has put out called the Dakota card. World Economic Forum loves it, but the idea is it's going to monitor you. If you spend too much on gas and on meat, or you fly somewhere, be on alert, your card could be cut off. Environment, social governance is a scam. Vivek Ramaswamy is pretty much running his entire presidential campaign exposing it. He's done a very good job on that. And of course, that is where essentially you can't get funding if you're an energy company unless you meet all the woke criteria of critical race, transgender ideology, and all the climate scam. So these are some of the alternatives done by the Consumer Research Organization, a conservative group. Enabling slave labor and genocide is what ESG stands for, and elitist, socialist, and grifters. That's my favorite, and those are the three heads of the equity asset firms. The good news is people, because of Ron DeSantis and a lot of the state attorney generals, they're pulling out of ESG. It's become toxic to them, and that just shows you how they are subject. These firms that are added up are bigger than the entire U.S. economy, can be broken and back down. Not BlackRock, but the others. Okay, so you will say nothing and be happy. The collapse of free speech. Big tech, this is an important point because so much of what's accelerated, well, since Trump ran in 2016, but particularly since COVID, big tech censorship is not a private company, as many libertarians and Washington think tanks might tell you. Big tech censorship is literally government censorship. It's government farming out violations of the First Amendment to big tech, and you can see it behind the scenes now. We've seen the Freedom of Information. We've seen our intelligence agencies, FBI, CIA, colluding with Twitter and Facebook. We've seen the Freedom of Information Act from the Biden administration telling them to eliminate dozens of people on a list, and then big tech says they're gone. What do you have next for us? In COVID, they said government is your single source of truth. That's the New Zealand Prime Minister. Take all non-government information with a grain of salt. We will continue to be your single source of truth. And of course, Anthony Fauci, I represent the science. This is a quote from John F. Kennedy when on the 25th anniversary of the Voice of America. It's like 1962, he said this. For a nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth in falsehoods in an open market is a nation afraid of its people. And that's what this whole thing, when you see on misinformation and we're going to have fact check, they're afraid of anyone seeing information that counters what the government says. Remember, the government take any non-government information with a grain of salt. That sounds like Pravda. Sounds like the old Soviet Union. But we no longer believe that, what John F. Kennedy says, at least as a nation. So all I really didn't know about COVID, I learned during the climate debate. That was a popular book, came out in 1985 about kindergarten. I changed it to during the climate change debate because COVID and climate are so similar. In the climate debate, I learned activists want you to panic. And why do they want that? Because when you panic, you don't think rationally and you don't make good decisions. In the COVID debate, activists wanted you to panic. Neil Ferguson sounds the alarm. Bill Gates, 30 million people could be dead. Panic! All based on unverified and incorrect viral models. In the climate debate, billionaires bought the media. Associated Press, NPR, working with Facebook and the Rockefeller Foundation, funding their climate news. AP announces the single largest expansion of their reporting with foundation money from climate activist groups. So literally the mainstream media are paid press releases from foundations and climate activists. In the COVID debate, billionaires bought the media. Bill Gates pumps tens of millions of dollars to pay for positive media. And there you go. I identify as a doctor. He's a high school dropout that never went anywhere, but he takes pictures of him in the white lab coats. He does needles. He's actually injected kids for photo ops. He plays a doctor, so he does identify as a doctor. In the climate, the UN and governments are your single source of truth. UN declared this last fall before the Egyptian UN climate summit. We own the science. The world should know it. We partnered with Google to ensure only UN results appear. This is what we're dealing with. And of course, it's the same thing there. The same thing there as New Zealand and Fauci. In the climate debate, Big Al Gore and Google track your every move. Thousands of satellites watching farms, emissions, factories. They're getting all the data because then the penalties and restrictions will come. Al Gore partnering with Google to make your life miserable. In COVID, big government tracked your every move. The CDC tracked phones to see if you followed lockdown orders. Again, this is where they're headed, all this. Climate envoy John Kerry is correct. The parallels between COVID and climate are screaming at us, both positive and negative. And so John Kerry admits that, what I'm telling you here. So this is the next phase, and this is the heart of the Great Reset. Climate lockdowns. In 2009, MIT climate scientist Richard Lindzen, it's hard to imagine a better leverage point than carbon dioxide to assume control over a society. If you demonize it and gain control, you, so to speak, control everything. So how could they imagine what would scare people more than carbon dioxide is going to melt the Arctic and flood Florida and kill polar bears? Well, they were able to imagine it, and that was the COVID virus. In 2018, first of all, the World Health Organization declared climate the greatest health challenge of the 21st century. UN said the quiet part out loud in June of 2020. We need a total fossil fuel lockdown for a climate revolution. So again, remember, this is the world is dealing with lockdowns. The UN is doubling down, telling the people we need a climate lockdown. The New York Times, before you get too excited, says lowering crime causes global warming. This is actual headline, actual New York Times papers. And the idea is the less people you have in jail means the more emissions you have. When you let a prisoner out of jail, they use a lot more stuff and cause a bigger carbon footprint. So it's better to have people locked up. That's basically what they're saying. This is the New York Times. So keep that in mind because they're arguing for a lockdown of people, a prison lockdown. So that's what a COVID lockdown. So if you go back to 2013, Ivo de Boer, top UN official, shutting down the whole economy is the only way of reaching the global warming goal. Think about this. They were talking about this almost a decade before COVID lockdowns. This is chilling in my research. November 2019, the UN demanded a 7% annual cut in CO2 6 months before COVID global lockdowns. There it is. That's the actual screenshot, actual quote, actual everything from the United Nations article. Presto, 1 year later, December 2020, carbon dioxide emissions fell 7%. So they called it 6 months before the lockdowns, and then they made it happen. And 9 years earlier, they had said we need to shut down the world to meet our climate goals. But guess what? It's still not enough because by 2021, this is the UK Guardian, corporate mainstream paper, global lockdowns needed every 2 years to meet the Paris climate goals. So the lockdowns we had just weren't quite enough. They want to keep it going, but they're going to give us a year off. So it's just every 2 years. You get a year off. You'll be able to go back to church and school. COVID lockdowns have helped save the planet. This is what environmentalists were asking. A Bill Gates, George Soros-funded professor actually said the phrase climate lockdown, we've been saying climate lockdown's a conspiracy theory. No, a Bill Gates, George Soros-funded scientist coined the term, Morano Mazzucato. And look at what she says. This is her quote, ban consumption of red meat, and extreme energy saving, stop drilling, overhaul economic structures, do capitalism differently. Chuck Schumer in Washington has urged a national climate emergency. Why do people want Biden to declare a national climate emergency? Well, here's why. The BBC did an analysis, unrelated to climate necessarily, but the abuse emergency powers goes all the way from Roman Republic through the Middle Ages. Chile, South Africa, and of course 1930s Germany. That's how you get the greatest expansion of power of government is during emergency power declarations, a la COVID, and a la terrorism as well. The 2001 Patriot Act has still not been repealed. We're still living under the Patriot Act terrorism. This is the Patriot Act, which had surveillance of suspected terrorists, which now been redefined to include angry parents at school board meetings, and Canadian truckers are all considered domestic terrorists. But we're still living under the 9/11 emergency. Joe Biden extended it. Originally signed September 14th, 2001. This gives the government extraordinary powers, which they're now freely using against their own citizens. Biden could declare a climate emergency. He almost declared it last summer, but then Senator Manchin of West Virginia caved and signed onto the Inflation Reduction Act. But why do they want it so bad? 130 new powers would be granted to Joe Biden and mayors and governors, and they could do everything from banning cars on certain days of the week to closing gas stations to limiting meat, to limiting your flights. If you're in a climate emergency, again, without democracy, that's the key. International Energy Agency net zero report urges behavioral changes, shift away from private car use, thermostat controls, limits on your hot water. This is a major international organization laying exactly out what they want to do. UK-funded report that was debated in their parliament, which they didn't even fight it. I mean, even the conservatives in UK didn't challenge the premise. Stop flying, no new roads, airport closures, stop eating beef and lamb, stop doing anything that causes emissions, and regulate CO2 similar to asbestos. We inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2. Human breath is now equivalent to asbestos. This is the journal Nature, one of the premier scientific journals. COVID lockdowns key to begin carbon allowances, more prepared to accept tracking and limitations to achieve a safer climate. So you see what's happening. This is not obscure. I didn't get some Greenpeace blogger and make a big deal about it. British Medical Journal, meat and dairy hikes, 80% reduction in meat consumption, substantially fewer journeys by car. 230 medical journals declare COVID-19 response to be a template for climate. What response was that? Chinese style, one party, no democracy, imposed from the executive order, corporate government collusion, restrictions on your life are the most consequential decisions. School, church, work, stay at home. The Great Travel Reset. This is in Oxford Mail. Again, all mainstream sources. They want to cut car use, place strict rules on journeys of your car. When you come to the edge of your 15-minute city, you have to pay a fine if you exceed too many times a year. Some of the proposals allow you up to 95 times to leave without paying the fine, but you're limited. And the idea is you're doing this to save the planet. I believe something like this happened, when people drank Kool-Aid years ago. But I mean, this is what's happening. Again, this is mainstream, not obscure stuff. This is headlines from this week. This is May 21, or from, I guess, last couple weeks ago. Airline climate restrictions. France bans short-haul flights. 2.5 hours or less, you're now forced to take cars or trains. Greenpeace wants a 6-hour ban on flights in the EU. Guess that's coming. Besides that, look at this, Bloomberg News, no more cheap flights, climate compliance laws get stricter, ticket prices going up. We're going to be like 100 years ago when only the wealthy could afford that seaside vacation. They're taking away our freedom of movement through climate compliance and outright bans on travel. BBC in 2023, can living ultra-low carbon lifestyle really be achieved by personal choice alone? The BBC. It's not your choice anymore. It's not Riley Gaines' choice whether she wants to compete with a man or see a man naked in the locker room. It's not her choice. It has to be compelled. Climate rules have to be compelled. COVID rules have to be compelled. Critical race, transgender, everything has to be no personal choice anymore. BBC also asked, what would a flying free world look like? Fresh fruits and veggies disappear from our supermarkets in the winter. Huge adjustment in supply chain. It's about when, not if. Do you understand what's happening? This is not, again, not a Greenpeace blog, not some obscure thing. I'm not citing some anonymous document or anonymous source. This is all out in the open. And they're literally talking, remember when you can't have strawberries because they weren't in season? Well, when did that end? About 1955? Well, guess what? They want to bring that back. You'll go nowhere and be happy. Electric vehicle, this is Business Insider. Electric vehicles won't save us. We need to get rid of cars completely. Boris Johnson's secretary, his Pete Buttigieg, his Secretary of Transportation, owning a car is outdated 20th century thinking. We must move to shared mobility. They want you to get an app when you need a car, not actually own a car. The World Bank is telling automakers they're not going to help finance the production of gas-powered cars. Charge EVs with what? This is hilarious because California executive order, California Air Resources Board, bypassing democracy, banned gas-powered cars, I think 2035. But about 3 or 4 days after they banned them, announced the ban in the future, they literally couldn't tell electric vehicle chargers not to charge because they had done so far with the green agenda, their grid couldn't order it. And that's a that's a Babylon Bee actual headline. It's a spoof headline, but it could be real. State with no electricity orders everyone to drive cars that run on electricity. But that's actually accurate because they don't want you to go anywhere. That's the whole point. So we're borrowing from Cuba, East Germany. When you ban gas-powered cars, you're intentionally creating car shortages, which then is going to put the value of used cars going up. Cuba's the mecca of used cars. On the right is the crappy East German Trabant, which you had to wait on sometimes a 10-year plus waiting period. It was the only government-approved car you could buy in East Germany. Guess what? We're fast becoming the day in America where the only government-approved car is going to be an electric vehicle. If you think, okay, I have my car, I'm keeping it, well, corporate government collusion. Australian Bank is the first to announce it, other banks joining in. They're going to ban loans for gas-powered cars. So you got the automakers told by the World Bank they can't make them. You have the states and federal governments and EU banning gas-powered cars, and now you have banks saying they won't give out car loans if you buy a gas-powered car. And if you're still lucky enough to have a gas-powered car through all that, you're going to start finding gas station shortages. Colorado, California are already stopping the creation of new gas stations. Again, all mainstream headlines here. I'm just telling you, this is what their agenda. And who's the winner? Charles Payne talked extensively about this. China. Say goodbye. This is Business Insider. Again, mainstream. Say goodbye to the U.S. car market. Cheap Chinese EVs are coming. Chinese EV surge threatens automakers. If the battery is key to the EV future, China's got a lock on it. China, China, China. They are past South Korea and the U.S. for global car production. They are going to fast become the world's #1 automaker. Who would have ever thought of Chinese cars? It's coming. You will own nothing, but someone else will own it all. First, they came for your energy, then your SUV, and now this is the UK Times. Houses pose more danger than vehicles to the climate. Again, mainstream headline. Rethinking home ownership. This is UCLA. This is a UCLA professor. Given the scope and scale, we need another type of escape route, away from the ideology of ownership. How many people here are guilty of the ideology of ownership? Okay, I see a lot of hands going up. Okay, well, that's now what they're going after. And if you go back to 1976, the UN laid this out. Their Vancouver Declaration, Habitat 1, land can't be treated as an ordinary asset. Private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation, concentration of wealth, and contributes to social injustice. They've now, you see, it's all, this is 1976, they just tied in critical race, equity, all the woke stuff back. This has been in the works for decades. Financial Post, with $20 trillion between them, BlackRock, Vanguard could own almost everything by 2028. Whether it's San Francisco, Washington, New York suburbs, they're going in and buying, and also the farms, which we're getting to now, the great food reset. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay. Slashing farm emissions critical to fighting climate change. John Kerry, our climate envoy, has now food in his target. The great food reset. Charles Payne talked about this. The Irish government seeks to sacrifice 200 cows to reach net zero, and now U.S. farms are next. Now, keep in mind here, just like France was, they want us to say, oh, thank you to our betters by only doing a 2.5-hour flight ban instead of the 4 or 6 that had been proposed. They were going to call up to 1.3 million cattle. So I think the Irish should be grateful it's only 200,000 cows that they're going after. They're trying to make meat a rare and expensive treat by creating intentional meat shortages. And I'll get to what they're replacing. So then this is Politico magazine, mainstream Washington. The current trend in the U.S. is leading toward the creation of a Chinese-owned agricultural land monopoly. Chinese-owned. Wait a minute. I think we have good news to report. China lost the race. Guess who they lost to? A homegrown American. Let's all give us that round of applause for it. Oh, wait, no, don't. It's Bill Gates. No, forget it. Bill Gates has officially beat China and is now, according to NBC News, America's largest single farmland owner. And I love this. This is an actual quote from NBC News. Bill Gates is not the one in overalls. He's not the one on the tractor doing the farming. He's the landlord. For a minute there, I thought he was like Mr. Douglas and Mr. Haney was selling him an old rusty tractor or something, but no. Bill Gates is just buying up all the lands using shadow companies. So what is Gates' agenda in having this kind of sway in agricultural policy? Rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef. Synthetic beef. Now, this is two things. This is the vegetable oil processed Impossible Burger, and it's also synthetic lab-grown meat done from the stem cells of cows and animals, put into a steel vat with additives done and then printed on a 3D printer. Lab-grown meat in steel vats. And by the way, why would he want everyone to do that? Does he not making money off this, is he? Oh, Bill Gates, Richard Branson are betting lab-grown meat might be the food of the future. Huge investments. Bill Gates, all rich countries should move to 100% synthetic beef. Lab-grown meat, worse for the planet. New Scientist, this is actually a left-wing, lab-grown meat, 25 times worse for the climate. So Bill Gates, big climate savior, buying the land and then trying to push the lab-grown meat and the synthetic. Apparently it's not working out. Lab-grown meat meets closer to American dinner plates, Reuters News. The World Economic Forum has promoted you print up your fake meat on a printer, 3D printer. This is an Israeli article as well. Printed steak, Israeli company unveils lab-grown beef chunks, 3D printed. What's for dinner tonight, honey? Ooh, I got a roundhouse steak. It's coming up. It'll be ready in about, 40 minutes. It's coming up on the printer, the 3D printer. UK environmental activist, he's an advisor to Greta Thunberg. He's a major player in the EU and United Nations climate agenda. Shutting down animal farming altogether is one of the greatest causes of climate breakdown. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They want to shut it down altogether. Eat less meat. UN climate change reports calls for changes to the American diet. This is Yahoo Finance. Americans may have to say goodbye to steaks, burgers as beef costs. This is all in the pipeline. They're doing everything they can to make it rare, expensive, and shortages. New York Times praises inflation as a way to adjust to what we eat. You're eating less resource-intensive meat and more vegetables. So they're using bad monetary policy and debts and deficits and inflation to force you into the climate agenda. The highest rated ESG score country in the world, Sri Lanka. This is how the World Economic, this is how I will make my country rich, the former head of it. And then after the presidential palace was overrun and the country collapsed because of their climate net zero sustainable agricultural revolution, the presidential palace was done, the president exiled, the World Economic Forum just removed the page. No more praising of that. So never let a crisis go to waste. The USAID chief declared in 2022, catastrophic food and fertilizer shortages are an opportunity to hasten transitions. And she actually said, quote, never let a crisis go to waste, unquote. Or never let chaos go to waste. So climate policy caused food shortages, not climate change. Al Gore is warning we need to wake up quickly. There's a looming food crisis. They've been predicting climate food shortages for decades. Meanwhile, crop yields, wheat, coffee, CO2, NASA in 2016 admitted that CO2 was greening the earth, deserts were shrinking, CO2 fertilization, and this is what they come up with, is that we're still facing shortages, and when their policies create food shortages, be it meat, going after high-yield agriculture, as they are in the Netherlands, trying to shut the small farms, big farms unaffected, they claim it's from climate change. They'll claim it's from climate change when it's actually their climate policy. So, if you can't afford food, and you're struggling, just skip breakfast. That's what the corporate media is telling us. That's all you got to do. It's not that big of a deal. You can cut out one meal and save a lot of money. You don't have to change anything. So what are you going to eat if they don't have, what's your source of protein if you can't eat meat and they make it rare and expensive? Eating insects soon. That's the World Economic Forum. Europeans have now officially allowed cricket powder and small wheelworms to be consumed. But you see, Italy is fighting back. They've banned insect flour from pasta, and Italy is having a ban on lab-grown meat. So Italy is leading the way in Europe fighting this nonsense. They take their food very seriously. As an Italian, I can tell you that. CNN. I think everyone's finished eating. That's why I waited for this one. Cockroach milk is the protein drink you didn't know you've been missing. I didn't know it. Did you know it? I mean, see, who said CNN can't inform you? This is what they promote. Could beer made from urine help water shortages? I mean, this is what they're saying. Well, hold on. You are the pollution they want to eliminate. This is the Scientific American. Human pee is a pollutant in the U.S. and can contribute to warming. Not making this up. Eating too much protein makes pee a pollution problem. So you eating too much meat, the steak we had last night probably added, 2 degrees to your children's lives. Okay, I got that. Okay, Harvard School of Public Health. This is the news. They're linking COVID and climate. Root cause of climate will also increase pandemics. We need to take climate action to prevent the next pandemic. Did you see the little sleight of hand? If you don't support the Green New Deal now, you're a grandma killer because unchecked climate change leads to more COVID-like viruses. Harvard School of Public Health, not obscure blogger, not a secret document, not an anonymous source. They're telling you out loud what they want to do, all the organs of our society. Washington Post, climate change is increasingly viewed as a public health crisis. Guess what? What happened was they were jealous. Climate activists were jealous of how COVID empowered public health overnight to do everything they wanted, shutting down the economy, stopping freedom of movement. And so now they want to merge the two. And by the way, climate needs public health in COVID. COVID does not need climate. No, climate stands no chance. You can gin up fear across party ideology with a virus. Climate just never scared people. Sorry. You can be, well, not a lot of people. It's scared kid. They gave up trying to scare adults and eventually went to focus on kids. And that's the whole rise of children being brainwashed. And they're the most climate phobic people. So this is true. Now, this is the Harvard Environmental Law Review. Once again, I didn't find, a Extinction Rebellion blog and I'm trying to make hay and just being silly. This is in the Harvard Environmental Review. Climate homicide. You can prosecute big oil for climate death. So you can be charged with committing climate homicide. Not making this up. This is the mainstream paper in Canada, a whole group of doctors. This was the doctor that did it first, head of the emergency room, diagnosed the first clinically diagnosed patient in the world as suffering from climate change. Doc, what do I have? Climate change. No, not that. What's the treatment? You gotta donate to Al Gore's organization and retweet Greta Thunberg 3 times and you'll be better. This is not making this up. I mean, this is actual headlines. So let's review. You can be charged with committing climate homicide. You can be diagnosed as suffering from climate change, and you can die from climate change. A whole study in a peer-reviewed journal coming from the Australian National University. You can add climate change to cause of death on death certificates. Now, did you die with climate change or of climate change? I don't know. I'm sure they'll have gunshot victims and car accident people they'll claim died of climate change. This is where we're headed. So you can die from climate change. So just to repeat, you can be charged with climate homicide, you can be diagnosed with suffering from climate change, and you can die with climate change listed as your cause of death. Mainstream sources, not making any of this up. Of course, the reality destroys it. Over the last 100 years, climate-related deaths have dropped 99%. And everyone knows this. This isn't controversial. This isn't disputed. But this is the whole thing. They're making it sound like we live in a public health climate emergency. Fossil fuels have made us so safe from any kind of climate, be it man-made or natural. It's absurd to even talk about it. Some odd solutions. The Atlantic, on top of everything else, nuclear war would be a climate problem. Now, how many of you think of nuclear war and think like, well, geez, that would destroy the climate? Here's my favorite, Huffington Post. Could a small nuclear war reverse global warming? Hey, remember nuclear winter? We could cool the earth. Yeah. This is insane. They've published this stuff. This is the New York Times. Earth now has 8 billion humans. This man wishes there were none. The voluntary human extinction movement. Is the New York Times profiling anyone on the other side of this? Will they profile Riley Gaines positively? This was a puff piece about a guy who wants to eliminate humanity on the earth. The New York frickin' Times. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is mainstream, out loud, not obscure. COVID and climate merge. This is from just a month ago. Rockefeller and the World Health Organization have announced a partnership for preventing pandemics fueled by climate change. World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty. This is I'm winding this up. This is the dangerous thing coming down the pike. This has already happened. They had their meeting. Michelle Bachmann actually was at the WHO meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, this past maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And this treaty is moving. Biden has been pushing it. This is the Washington Post headline. What does the Washington Post headline actually call it? quote, a radical pandemic treaty. The Washington Post is calling this radical. We're not finished. The UK Telegraph, who could impose global lockdowns? Member states would be obliged to follow the WHO's instructions when regarding to pandemics, including vaccine passports, border closures, quarantine. The plan would require member countries to recognize WHO as guidance and coordinating authority of international public health response. Biden administration is signing the United States up to this. Donald Trump got us out of the WHO. Thank God, but Joe Biden put us right back in. This is frightening stuff, and this is happening now. What's up next? Well, Vogue magazine. Is having a baby pure environmental vandalism? How many people have engaged in environmental vandalism in this room? Let me see. All right. But here's the thing. If you do have kids, according to the New York Times, only short ones allowed. Actual paper, there has never been a better time to be short. Not making this up. New York Times, mate with shorter people for a greener planet. I promise you, this was in the pages of the New York Times. If you're speechless, there's only one reason. Climate change is the cause. It's causing language loss. So if you just can't think of anything to say, climate change. So in conclusion, keep calm and trust the experts. That's what Anthony Fauci, trust the government, they're the sole source. Trust the UN, they own the science of climate. You'll be exposed to toxic chemicals and be happy. Biden EPA chief, when he was in the Ohio derailment, trust the government. New York Times. Actual headline, 2021, critical thinking leads to misinformation. Don't go down that rabbit hole. This is what they want you to do. Just trust them. Pravda, the Soviet Union, they wanted you to trust them too. Critical thinking, as we're taught to do it, isn't helpful in the fight against misinformation. You must not do your own research, says Forbes, when it comes to science. That's only the purview of the experts. If you're a parent with a 6-year-old who was masked for 8 hours a day, who are you to go to the school board and complain? Are you an epidemiologist? Do you have 30 years and a PhD with government public health bureaucracy? You have no right to tell them that. They know best with your kid. They own the science. Question authority has become too much of a good thing, and it's killing people. So remember that. Never question authority. Slate magazine, it's time to give up on facts. Well, at least temporarily. How about 2 weeks to give up on facts? Lay them down in terms of a more useful weapon, emotions. Go back to Greta Thunberg. What does she say? I want you to panic, because when you panic, you make bad decisions. Economist Milton Friedman, 1999, free societies of the kind we've been lucky enough to experience for the last 150 years are a very rare exception in human history. Most people, most of history, have lived in tyranny and misery. That's chilling, because if you look at the history of the world, he's exactly right. So how do we fight back against this? Angry parents at the lowest level of politics had the most consequential change in COVID. And it was the angry parents who went to the school board meetings, who were willing to be called domestic terrorists by Biden, who were willing to be arrested, who literally turned elections. I live in Virginia. The school board rebellion that started in Loudoun County, Virginia, led to the toppling of the Democratic Party machine and Terry McAuliffe, who was running on COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates for all Virginians. He lost spectacularly. And it was credited with these, this is the New York Times. After a scare in November, New Jersey's governor and other leaders held back talks of lifting mandates because the patients, they wanted to return to normalcy. And the New York Times detailed how they did focus groups, the Democratic Party. It led to the reversal of the mask and vaccine mandates in every major city from San Francisco, LA, Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C. because of the angry parents. How bad has it become? Well, this is 2014. RFK Jr., that's me interviewing him at the People's Climate March, October 2014. He told me he wanted to jail climate deniers and punish climate skeptics. I wish there was a law you could punish him under. He wanted CEO of energy companies with 3 hots and a cot at The Hague. Now, here's how much the world's changed. That's 2014. RFK in 2023, red-pilled on the climate agenda. He declares climate change being exploited by the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates the same way COVID was exploited, top-down totalitarian controls on society. People see climate as just another crisis that's being used to strip mine the wealth of the poor to enrich billionaires. That's progress. Look at that. I mean, that was, you can see, I think we're both mad at each other in that interview here. That's 2014. His campaign reached out to me about a month ago and said my video of him saying he wants to jail climate deniers was causing them a huge headache. His campaign reached out, requested the full copy. I gave it to him, and they said they're going to let me have an interview for my radio podcast, but it hasn't happened yet. I put in the request. But let's hope I can get a second interview with him. But he's really conciliatory when it comes to climate. He says, I won't talk about climate in the campaign. He actually says that now. So we need to have the great resist. That's what we have to fight back against. We need to prescribe freedom, not mandatory repression on any future public health threat. And that means prohibiting the mask mandates, vaccine mandates, the freedom of movement. We got to give people information and then let society decide. And if there's any restrictions, anything like that has to come through a vote of a legislator. What we really need is this, emergency power reform. Every state needs to start introducing this to end these emergency declarations, because this is when the greatest expansion of government power and human rights abuses happen, as the BBC historian noted, throughout history, going back to the Roman Republic. So the Great Reject, someone actually had T-shirts about the great, T-shirts like that, but World Enslavement Forum. And I'll end on this. This is the new 2023 world, how you talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories. I mean, 2023 is the year conspiracy realities outnumber conspiracy theories. And with that, my group is Committee for Constructive Tomorrow. The website's Climate Depot. That's the book. I think there's only one copy outside left for sale when I saw it. And that's how you can reach me if you have any questions, and on Twitter as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time.